As we've heard already, we have heard 4 quite different definitions of ethics and ethical challenges facing art and also society at large at the moment. What I was thinking a bit about, and the question I'd just like to, I guess, ask all of you, because it's something I've been thinking about hearing your presentations, is going back to what you were talking about, Sonja, initially, talking about the fact that we may have forgotten that art can be dangerous, or that art is dangerous, as you were speaking about this notion from Arnhem, because as we have already touched upon, we are in societies that are in many ways under pressure. Also, art institutions are under pressure, not only from governments and social policies, but also just from the plain fact of how to raise enough money in an ethical way to keep running and make relevant programs for the audience. Carsten, you were talking a bit about art, love and revolution, which I really like, but you also sounded quite skeptical about the real potential, about, you talked about the defeat of radical critique and the way that when you sometimes speak with artists and art students that they seem oblivious to the fact that they are also participating in a system of exploitation somehow. But I would like to ask all of you, where do you see art fit in all of this? How can art act as a revolutionary force, or can it at all in these circumstances that you are all in one way or the other criticizing? Big question.
I don't know if I have something to say. Is this working? Yes, is it working? Yes. I think where is art fitting in this? I would like to repeat the words of Agamben to that question. It's both. It is, on the one hand, it's dangerous, correcting a little bit perhaps the strong words I used before, in the sense that it is interrupting, it is criticizing, it is revolutionary against general rules, against consensus there is in a certain society on all, on order, on ethical, but also political, and so on. So in this sense, I agree with Agamben that, and I also that it is revolutionary, and I also agree with Virno, who says the same thing, but even stressing, underlining Virno, that whatever its content is, that's I think a very strong idea of him, which is with which I agree completely, and which is also an answer to the question I had before, and to which perhaps I didn't respond in a good manner. The answer, in fact, to the question why instrumentalize art is this. Namely, whatever its content is, it's revolutionary. It had this revolutionary power has nothing to do with the discursive content it contains. In one, that's one thing. Another thing is that art is also. And that's not, of course, the motive of this question. It is at the same time giving us something. It is giving us. Art is. I think I agree with the idea that it is beyond categories. In that sense that it's. Whatever its content, traditional or contemporary, it confronts us with our human being, our potentiality, it confronts us with our primary level, beyond categories. I don't know if this already is some answer. Perhaps somebody wants to
can art be dangerous? Well, only if someone's listening, or only if someone's watching. You know, if a statue falls in a forest, but nobody's there to watch it fall, then what does it achieve? I think that for art and for the art institution to have a role, to have an ethical role, it also has to have a social impact. It has to be speaking to an audience, and it has to be participating in a dialogue. We spoke a bit earlier about co-curation, or the collaborative approach in lots of museums, and that's exactly what we should be doing if we want art to stay relevant and to stay true and to actually be more than something that is just incredibly inward-looking. And I mean that in terms of actually our institutions going out and getting involved, getting their hands dirty and doing some of this work themselves. Because it's all very well to theorize about it, but actually the museums that are pushing practice furthest in this area are ones like National Museum of Liverpool or Tate Liverpool, who are working out there in the community and working with some of the great problems of our time, like, for example, the huge number of people in the developed world who are struggling with dementia, and the huge number of people who are increasingly on the sharp ends of public funding cuts. Art should be dangerous, and it should be speaking up about these issues, and it should be engaging in and showing what it can do.
I will be thank you for the question. I will be very brief, but I will start just saying something that is related to the concept of revolution that Carsten just presented. I think how art can be revolutionary, can be an ethical revolutionary form. I think it can be a revolutionary form by offering you critical insights on what is going on in the contemporary society and what are the critical issues of the contemporary society. Of course, using different channels which are not and not just in art institutions, but collaborate with art institutions to use and to explore new ways to communicate this revolutionary message. And also, I would say that to be somehow to be an artistic intervention that is present in the society, that is aware of what is going on, but at the same time that is not entangled with politics, with the contemporary politics, because somehow I think Alfredo Jar summarized this very, very clearly when he says that artists have the potential and the moral somehow task to offer new insights for looking at the world and not for just reflecting how the world that we live is. So yeah, this is I think.
Yes. The main problem is, of course, that there is no evident correlation between resistance, if artwork should somehow produce a resistant position, and redemption. The redemptive force of a work of art has to do with perception and reflection and the contemplative strength invested in it, and so there is this openness in the presence of the artwork, which at an immediate level could contain a moment of resistance, and which at a more deduced or transcendent level should of course contain a moment of redemption, so that you have a sort of, not dialectics, but at least relationship. Of course, there's also the problem of time, and some of the situations are too acute to have philosophical preoccupations, of course. And I imagine that Egyptians revolutionaries, or Syrian revolutionaries, or Greek revolutionaries, living in acute situation have not thought of, are we doing resistance now, or is there a redemptive contents in our work, or this sort of things. And it is because, of course, that a visual intervention is something which takes place on another level than discursive interventions. And discursive interventions have to do with language and institutions. And the visual interventions of artists can take place in the open space and even outside any context. They can be preparing something that they don't know really if the intervention will happen the next day or not. So it has really to do with this being prepared, with this readiness I mentioned before. On the other side, there is an expectation which we have seen to a certain degree in the last documentas and also in the last biennales, and that is, in fact, that visual art should become some sort of mother tongue of the international proletariat, and that is perhaps the case. When you say the word proletariat, then you get a crisis in the technological system. So, but anyhow, and I don't know if this is a good thing. If we should think that it is important for visual art to have this role of a sort of a visual or figural or anti-discursive mother tongue function of the international proletariat. Anyhow, it is evident that it is a call for a role, and a call for a role inside the artwork and coming from the institution. And when the institution is asking for dangerous artwork, then it becomes really dangerous.
They're trying to subvert us all. I think that's a good start of the day. Actually, I would also like to sort of go slightly further in that direction. Carsten, you were also talking about Guy Debord's, obviously, classical text society of the spectacle, and I was thinking of the idea of the spectacle, and I think in many ways, I think we live in, at least in Western Europe, we live in, or we have an art world at the moment which is completely fascinated and enamored with the spectacular, because we see funding from both private sponsors and also public sponsors increasingly go to the spectacular, almost exclusively. And I was wondering a bit about what you were saying, Alistair, about, well, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody notices, is there a critique? If art has some kind of potentiality still, if we believe that it has some kind of potentiality, and a real potentiality, not the kind of, semi-art institution criticizing itself and thereby legitimizing itself, do you have any idea how can we as art professionals navigate between this demand for the spectacular in order to make an impression and still retaining some kind of criticality towards the spectacular society? I don't know, Irene, maybe you have a few thoughts on that.
Can I take some time?
Sure.
I'll fill some time for you. I was just going to say, coming back to the, just because it's on my mind because I went there recently, the Royal Academy show of Ai Weiwei, which absolutely links that notion of the spectacle and the spectacular with an incredibly potent and powerful political message. And I know people have been moved to tears in that exhibition. And I think that it succeeds in doing what it sets out to achieve you know, in engaging people in a discourse about China, in a critique of China and of Chinese politics, which we might be vaguely culturally aware of, but this helps to put a finer point on it. And I think that, you know, it's obviously it's a very well-funded institution which has an extremely high profile, but I don't think that diminishes the fact that it is in a way living up to that challenge of being on the one hand spectacular, but on the other hand posing some very difficult questions, and indeed at a time when the British government is cozying up to the Chinese regime as well. So I think that that's an example of how we can get that kind of balance right. Right up there.
Thank you so much for the question, and I think there is a potentiality for immersive art, if we want to call it like that, because in some way the spectacular and also the immersive works of art can be used and exploited somehow by the institutions to explore a different kind of knowledge, which is not a discursive knowledge, which is not like a kind of knowledge that happens on the level of the consciousness, but is more a sensorial knowledge. Is more something that a process that we go through and that we understand through our senses. And somehow this happens to all of us when we step into an installation nowadays, when all our senses, from the olfactory to the visual to the sight, I mean, when all our senses are involved and are stimulated, we feel that we learn something, we feel that we are engaging in a learning process, but somehow we lack the way of the interpretative tools to understand what are the outcome of this knowledge. So I think that maybe a task for art institutions is to explore how this sensorial knowledge can be critically used and also critically investigated and presented to our audiences.
Just a remark, perhaps the question is very complex, of course, because we were talking about exploitation before, but you have the economy has changed in a way that we cannot only we have to make the analysis that to which it was referred before, but we also have to think about how can we react towards an exploitation based also on in this knowledge economy or artistic economy, we can even say. It's very difficult to formulate the problem, because the art is, I agree with, I say the same thing, can be can interrupt, can offer another discourse, can confront us with the fact that things are not going well. But at the same time, the economy is using the same categories, instruments, how to pronounce it, of artistic work. So it is the economy itself is working with models of the performing artist. So how to of course, art, if it is not communicating at all. If it is hidden for everybody, it's nothing. It doesn't exist. So this is not an answer, but I want. The concern also that perhaps we should also not forget to think about the critique of economy question.
I just wanted to come back on something that you mentioned about maybe I misunderstood, but audiences lacking the interpretive tools to be able to engage with the artworks, and it just struck me that was that you know we're sometimes in danger of blaming the audience for not coming to our institutions with the right ideas or the right way of speaking about things, and I think some of the work that we've done around the in renewing our code of ethics has been very much about our duty, our responsibility to the public, to engage with the public on and in as equal terms as possible. You know, so I think that we also have an ethical responsibility to not to put up these interpretive barriers to engaging with contemporary art, which I think we do, especially in terms of some of the language that we use around it.
Can I say something? But when I mention interpretative tools, I'm mentioning a very common situation. A person that maybe is not educated in art history and then step into an contemporary art institution, but even in an art museum, and it says, well, you think, I don't think that I understand this. And I think that this is a common problem. And the fact that the majority of the people, I mean, that maybe are not educated in art, they say, I don't understand, or I don't think that this is art. I think that this is a lack of interpretative tool, but we come back, it's a responsibility of the art institution to give these tools through the curatorial approaches, through the way things are displayed. It's not just writing things on labels and put it on the wall. You know that gives to the audience a way to interpret things, because we don't read the script when we watch a movie, but somehow we are given the tool to understand the story or the plot, and in a way I think that we should do the same. And this is of course the greatest challenge, because if it was easier. It was easier.
Do we have any questions or comments from the audience? The three at once. Thank you.
Well, I heard there were some remarks about if a sculpture falls in the woods, is it there, or if an artwork isn't shown, it doesn't exist. But then, in these remarks, it's quite obvious that that you're talking from a perspective of being the academics. Like you're forgetting the first step, that the art has to be produced. And at that level, when the art is being produced, it's being produced by an artist, and at that moment it actually does exist, even if no one else sees it. It exists as a protest, as a process between the person producing it and the material, and at that level it should always be dangerous. It's always dangerous. So as you were struggling defining how art is dangerous, it's quite obvious that you're forgetting this first step.
I couldn't agree more that art does exist. That obviously it exists in the moment, in the act of production. But so I was making those comments more in terms of the discussion we're having today, in terms of being about the contemporary art institution and the role of the institution in that process. And that can only ever be about in engaging and facilitating the wider engagement of the public with those pieces of art.
But in the art institution, then just talking about the museum as such, but there's the first step always, like the step where the work is being produced. So that's part of the institution as well. It's not part of the building, but it's part of the whole setup. Without that, it can never exist. Although, albeit that many of the works are being produced many years ago, but like in contemporary art institutions, it's always there's always an artist who's coming there, and then in the collaboration with the curator, it will be transferred and understood.
Does a curator want to answer this?
Maybe we should take a few more questions from the audience.
Yes, does it work? Yeah. This is maybe just a question of clarification to Sonja, and thanks for your very interesting presentation. I'm not quite sure I understood the way in which you distinguish or do not distinguish between the level of artworks and the level of art institutions, because you say they are all, or maybe I misunderstood you, this kind of aporia between the can and the cannot, does that go for art and art institutions alike? This kind of tragic, or do you, well, I think basically my question is about whether to you art institutions have the same kind of potentiality, revolutionary potentiality, as the one that you connect to artworks or to art.
I was in fact not speaking in particular about art institutions, but rather about institutions in general. And more, myself, I was more thinking about political institutions, and then and I compared them with language, which is, according to me, the most elementary institution. So I can respond perhaps to your question, going back to the question or the remark before about you're forgetting the moment of the artist production itself in the present in the discussion here. I really do agree. I do not agree with the remark that we forget, but I agree with what you say. What I was, and now I come back to your question. What I tried to say is art is just like institutions in general. So I was more thinking about political institutions, but the same is valid for all institutions. And so institutions, art, and then language, they all have the same characteristic, that they are human inventions, human institutions, we should say. They are not naturally given. They were not always there, so they have in common that they are invented. But at the same time, that's what. Okay. What I wanted to say with this aporia between can and cannot. This was also something perhaps I had to clarify about the use of the word, the concept of contingency. So of course with contingency I mean the fact that something is related to time, and that it had not that it wasn't necessarily given, and it could also not have happened. but I would like to stress still more basic idea of the content of this concept of contingency, referring namely to classical philosophy as from Leibniz, who distinguished between you have necessity, that means that the things necessary are the things that cannot not be, and possible are the things that can be, and impossible are the things that cannot be, and contingent are the things that can at the same time be and not be. So I used really the concept in this sense. And art, institutions of all kinds, and language have this in common. This is about they can and cannot be at the same time. And that's where it makes it impossible. That's why it makes it at the same time revolutionary and with potential of resistance, and also I think the best word is that one I used already several times, a gift. Small comment?
Can I just ask a very quick question to Alistair? Previously you were mentioning that ethics in museums is related also to the concept of morality, but morality also in its etymological definition is referring to an ensemble of costumes or habits, norms, but you also said that when we are making ethical decisions in museums, each decision is made according to the context and to the contingency. So there is not like a unified way to define ethics, but is related to the circumstances. So since you are deciding how to structure the code of ethics, do you think that we can get rid of the code of ethics and think about something else for a museum in terms of, ethics, and maybe as Janet Mastin or she defines, can we talk about ethics as a discourse that is that touches upon the contingency rather than a code of prescriptive norms? Thanks.
Janet was on the ethics committee and helped out with a lot of the work that we did on the new code of ethics. When I talked about morality, I was trying to set the context for some of the discussions that we had, which was that actually lots of people don't really quite know what we were talking about, certainly in terms of codifying our ethics. Some people thought it was about sort of general, some people still think it's about general ideas of morality, about right and wrong, and what we wanted to do was set out a code of professional ethics that would be used and applied in everyday practice, which relates back to some ideas about morality, but isn't just, it's not just morality. This notion of ethics as discourse, we also discussed a great deal. We absolutely wanted the code to be something that was the foundation for an everyday ethical approach in museums, and not just something that people turn to in a time of crisis when somebody is trying to sell something from the museum, or when, I don't know, I mean, there was the previous code was absolutely full of stuff that was interesting, but probably shouldn't have been there. There was stuff about animal husbandry and stuff, so what we wanted to do was have a code that was shorter, that consisted of 3 key principles, which you break down into applicable parts, but something which you can really hold in your head all at once. You can't really hold 10 chapters of the code of ethics in your head at once, certainly not on a day-to-day basis. but you can kind of you can sort of hold that approach if you've got a more concise code, something that people will go back to on a regular basis. And what we really wanted to encourage was for people to ensure that their ethics was about reflection and dialogue, and you know, it says all this in the code that it's about being able to have those conversations and understand and be able to take different views from different stakeholders in any given discussion to come up with a view with the best information at hand about what is the best outcome in any given situation.
I think we have room for one final quick question.
Maybe it's also a remark that harks back to like both of the things, the questions of the danger of art and the sculpture falling in the forest, that where the victim may very well be the artist. I was wondering if we shouldn't turn the question. It seems to me like it's standing on its head. I have the feeling it should be turned onto its feet, which then would pose the term like, is maybe the art institution the place, the dangerous place? Because I think like the ISIS reference that we heard before was actually making exactly this point. The way that an artwork, or what we perceive as an artwork, is framed in an institution constitutes how we look at it, how we perceive it, and how we understand it. So, you know, like the colonialist history and how artifacts that have been accumulated in this time are presented. The whole subject of provenance and making that visible, I think, is a very interesting subject relating to historical museums in particular. So, yeah, I would advocate like the idea of a dangerous art institution.
Any comments on the dangerous art institution?
Only to say that I think that the best museums at the moment are the ones that are grappling with these issues and critiquing them. And again, in the UK, I mean, it's an obvious one, but the Slavery Museum in the UK is one that is absolutely using its mission to critique not only what happened, not only what happened over sort of 300-400 years earlier in the millennium, but and which we all know the history of reasonably well, but also issues of contemporary slavery, which are also hidden stories, and those are exactly the things that I would hope institutions are considering looking at.
Thank you.